So first of all, the Shiur tonight is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmosoi Shel Reb Avram Ben Shmuel, the Lefkowitz family. Today was the Yortzeit. Shianuach B'Sholom HaMishkovah Shel Yamelis Yosef for the beautiful family. Sharoni No Nachas and Simcha La'oirech Shonim Toivois. I also dedicate the Shiur Refuah Shlema for a very choshev Talmid Chochem who is in a desperate condition with advanced cancer. His name Reb Chaim Moshe Ben Rochel. Kodesh Baruch Hu should send a refuah shlema min hashamayim. So in this week's parsha we have a mitzvah which is a very precious mitzvah, and in some families it is very uncommon to be mekayim the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen. And in this week's parsha, ufeduyoi meben chodesh tivde be'erkech kesef chamesh shkolim b'shekel hakodesh, and the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen, the firstborn to a mother. And we have a mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen. And this mitzvah actually is 4 times in Torah's Moshe. Parshas Boy, Parshas Mishpotim, Parshas Kitiso, and in this week's parsha, Parshas Korach. And tonight we are discussing the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen. And as usually the style of the Shiur, first we talk about the fundamentals, about the lamdas, about the Hagdorah, the definition of the mitzvah, and then some details which are negei halacha l'maisa, questions that come up from time to time. What is Pidyon HaBen? Is it actually Pidyon, or is it just matnos kahuna? One of the chav daled matnos kahuna, because today we aren't aware of these halachas, but in days of yore, when Jews came into Eretz and they had a Beis HaMikdash, the land was divided into Shvatim. But Shevet Levi got no land, and they were not supposed to be engaged in plowing and sowing and harvesting and in agriculture. They were expected to dedicate their lives and their efforts only to avoid this Beis HaMikdash, and Chelef Ilochem Lohem Chelef Avidaschem. And they were supported by the people, and those were the Chav Daled Matnos Kahuna. Now, one of them is Pidyon HaBen. So when the Torah speaks about Pidyon, is it the transaction, or is it just supporting Shevet Kahuna? Is there an actual Pidyon? So we have 2 different concepts which we call Pidyon. Pidyon Hegdish ve Pidyon Maser Sheni. The difference between the two is Pidyon Hegdish is just like a transaction. This object belonged to Hegdish, and if I pay, then my money goes to Hegdish, and the object becomes mine, and it no longer has any kedusha, and it is mine to use as any other object. And therefore, Pidyon Hegdish is actually mitoras hakinyonim. It is like any other transaction, to the extent there's a huge discussion in Rishonim. How do we know kinyan kesef? There's a machlokes of Yerchel and Shlokish. Kesef koine min haTorah, or Schalipin koine min haTorah. Rabbi Yochanan says kesef koine metaltelin. When we're dealing with karka, with real estate, sodois bekesef yiknu. That's a posuk. How do we know kesef is koine bemetaltelin according to Rabbi Yochanan? Rashi says Pidyon Hegdish. V'nosan b'kameloi. So we learn from Pidyon Hegdish kinyan kesef. Masa shiny is a machlokes tanuim. Is it momen balim or momen gavoya? If it's momen balim, it's not a transaction. There is kedusha. So when I am poida maser sheni, it was mine. It still is mine. Just the Hegdish is removed, the kedusha is removed. So those are the 2 concepts of Pidyon Hegdish and Pidyon Maser Sheni. Pidyon HaBen has no effect aloha lamaisa. The child, the firstborn, was not Hegdish before the Pidyon. Nothing changes in his status. It's not a kinyan, because the baby was mine before the Pidyon, it's mine after the Pidyon. It was not mine before the Pidyon, and neither is it mine after the Pidyon, because a child is not a monetary possession of his parents. His parents bear responsibility. the privilege of having a child and responsibility of caring for the child. So how do we define Pidyon HaBen? No Kiddush is removed because there was no Kiddush in the first place. And it's not a transaction because the child didn't change Ba'alut, it didn't change hands from one person to another. But nevertheless, the Torah in all four psukim, all four sources, speaks about Pidyon. Or maybe it is just giving money for Shevet Kehena. So the Ramo, Seven Shin Hey in Yoredeya, Sif Yud, quotes the Rivash. The Rivash says, Ein Shlichus bePidyon HaBen. The father, and only the father, could redeem his son, could do Pidyon HaBen from the Kohen. He cannot appoint a Shaliach to do it for him. And that is the opinion of the Rivash. It's a big question whether that really is the opinion of the Rivash. And this is somewhat of a strange dilemma. Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph in Shuvas Rivash. It is the Shoyel that writes the Rivash. He has a question in the Nusach HaBrocha, and he suggests to understand the Nusach HaBrocha, maybe there is no Shlichus. The Rivash totally ignores the idea of the Shoyel, and he goes to a totally different discussion. So the Rivash neither rejects the opinion of the Shoyel, nor does he accept that opinion. He just ignores what was written to him. And the Ramo quotes the Rivash as if the Rivash says, Ein shlichus bePidyon HaBen. We assume that the Ramo decided if the Rivash doesn't reject what the Shoyel writes to him, obviously he agrees, which is questionable. So anyway, the Ramo Paskin, Shin Hey, Sif Yud, Ein shlichus bePidyon HaBen, and the Bir Agra, the Goan, disagrees. And both the Shach and the Taz disagree, and they say, Shluchos shel Adam kemoisoi. Why would Pidyon HaBen be different than many other mitzvahs that a person could perform al yedei shliach? And why wouldn't we say Shluchos shel Adam kemoisoi? But the Goan goes a step further. And the Goan says a person could be Makayim Pidyon HaBen without the father's consent. And it is the same as Reuven owes the money to Shimon. Levi knows that Reuven is in dire straits and he's struggling with Parnosa. He also knows that Reuven won't be willing to accept Matonas because Sonis Matonas Yechye. So Levi goes and he pays Shimon. Then the loan is gone because Levi paid that loan. So the Goan says, Pidyon HaBen is priyas choiv v'tu lo. It is not more than priyas choiv. The father has an obligation to give money to the kohen, like other matnas kohana. Anybody can do it, even without the consent of the father. He will need to compensate the father for taking away a mitzvah, and that is a sort of zehuvim, like choyt of mitzvah. But Pidyon HaBen is no different than priyas choiv. Ukemosha poreya choivo shel chaveira achov nifra. Same goes to Pidyon HaBen. And the Machne Ephraim has the very same opinion, and that is in Hilchas Chiva Metona, Siman Zayin. So these two great Gedolim assume that Pidyon HaBen has really nothing to do with Pidyon, but they don't explain, so why did the Torah use this expression of Pidyon if it's just giving matnas kahuna? So it would be more reasonable to say, if you had a ben bechor, you are obliged to give a gift to the kohen, which is chamish shloim. The Torah does use the lashon of Pidyon. So it is clear in the opinion of the Ramah and the Rivash, if shlichus doesn't apply, then obviously there is something beyond just giving money. If it's only giving money, of course a person could send money to the needy with a shliach. He could send truma to a kohen with a shliach, and you don't even need shlichus. So if the Rivash and the Ramah say shlichus wouldn't apply, obviously we must assume in their opinion that there is something beyond giving money. Because whenever you need to give money, whether it's tashlomei nizikin, or priyat chov, or mekach o memkar, or tzedakah la'aniyim, or matonis le'evyonim, you could always, it doesn't matter how you gave money to the person that needs to receive that money. It is all about the result. He got the money. You don't even need the din of shlichus. So obviously this would be a major machlokes between the Rivash and the Ramah on one hand. They say there is no shlichus by Pidyon HaBen, and there's no other way to explain their opinion, but there is a gather of Pidyon. There is something beyond just giving money. And the Gron and the Machna Ephraim say it's just like any poreya choivoi. And a person could be poreya that choivim without the father's consent because it is not more than priyas choiv. And I think the Pnei Yeshua and the Atzmais Yosef, two great achronim, are once again have argumentation, and it is based on the very same question. So in Kiddushin Daf Ches Omed Aleph, the Gemara says, "Hamekadesh b'shiroi." A person is mekadesh isha, and there are more rights in Simcha of Zion. The minig is to be mekadesh with a tabas, and I believe you never were at a chuppah, and the chosn was mekadesh. The mekadesh is the kala with an apple. Even though in the Gemara, yeah, that is very common. Hamekadesh b'tamora. He was mekadesh with a date, and the date was pochs m'shavaputa, shemesh shavaputa b'modai. And a person could be mekadesh with any shvei kesef. But I believe none of you ever was at a chuppah and the chosn took out a wafer or an apple and he said that ayat mekadesh asli. So then a more already writes Simcha of Zion that the minig is to be mekadesh with the tabas. And the source is, to many people this is a surprise, Tikunei Hazoyer Tikun Hei. That is the only early source that the minig is to be mekadesh with a tabas. And the Sefer HaChinuch says, and this sounds like a very modern idea, that the minig is that the woman never takes that tabas off her finger, and it is always with her. She should always be loyal and loving and dedicated. And whenever I say this chinuch, people ask me, so why doesn't the wife give a tabas to the husband? He too needs to remember every day to be loyal and caring and loving. So why is that? Very good question. I don't have an answer, but the answer is Uish Mekadesh ve'enu Uish Mekadeshes, and that's the way it is. There are so many things that we would maybe suggest differently, but this is the nature of Torah and the nature of Halacha. But anyway, so a person could be Mekadesh with anything, and the Gemara says in Kiddushin Daf Ches Amud Aleph, Mekadesh b'shiroi, Eino Mekadeshes, and the Yosef says, Eino Mekadeshes, and there are two reasons. So he was Mekadesh with some precious cloth, some silk beged. And the Gemara says, two pshotim, lama eino mekadeshes. Ma kesef the kayetz. I've called about the kayetz. When a person gives money, we know exactly how much the money is worth. And you don't need to go to an evaluation. It needs to be kayetz. It needs to be fixed and obvious how much it is worth. The other pshat is, lo samchidate. She doesn't know whether it's a shmata that's worth 10 shekel, or maybe it's really a very expensive garment that is worth thousands. And therefore, there's a chashash, lo samchidate, if she thinks that this garment is worth far more than it is worth, and b'diavad she might be disappointed and she might be hurt or offended, and therefore, ene mekadeshes. And the Gemara brings a raya from Pidyon HaBen. Rav Kahana shukol sidra. He took a beged, he took a garment. So if it works by Pidyon HaBen, why wouldn't it work by Kiddushin? And the Atzmais Yosef says, just like by Kiddushin, we need smichus das. We need smichus das by Pidyon HaBen as well. And if a kohen thinks that what you gave him is worth a fortune, and then he will find out that it's worth pennies, then lo samchidate. So the Atzmais Yosef understands that Pidyon HaBen is a two-sided transaction. The father gives the money, and the kohen is willing to give the child. But if it's just exeres hakosev kayetz, then why would that apply to Pidyon HaBen? What's the kesher between Pidyon HaBen and Kiddushin? The Pnei Yeshua argues, we don't need smichas das by Pidyon HaBen, because Pidyon HaBen is just a gift. And if you give the gift to the Kohen and it's worth Chumash Shloim, we don't need the smichas das of the Kohen, because this is one-sided. I need to give a gift to the Kohen. The Kohen doesn't need to give anything, so why do we need smichas das? So the Atzmas Yosef would side with the Rivosh and the Ramah, that Pidyon HaBen is an actual Pidyon and a transaction, but the Pnei Yeshua has the same opinion as the Gra and the Machna Ephraim. It's just matnas kahuna. It's just giving the Kohen a gift and not more than that. And that is why we don't need smichas das mitzad ha-Kohen. Tzayis HaChoshen, Reish Mem Gimel, quotes early sources that you could give Pidyon HaBen to a Kohen that is a minor, that is a cotton, and is not a bar kinyan. Why? So the Pri Chodesh, quoted by the Tzayis HaChoshen, the Pri Chodesh says, the Asacheres Makna cotton has a kinyan. So we need to give the Kohen Chamish Esloim, and Toises many times in Shas, Kiddushin Yutes, just one source, says, a cotton could be koinem in a Torah if das acheres makna, which means a cotton cannot be koinem a hefker. If he finds an anshept who says hefker, he doesn't have a kinyan d'oraisa, but when another person gives him a gift, then he's koinem. So the Pri Chodesh says, we give the kohen chamish esloim, so even though he's a cotton, he is koinem. But the Tzayis HaChoshen argues, by matnas kehena, there is no das acheres makna. Because when you give matnas kehena, you're giving the kohen what he deserves and what is actually his. So you can't give matnas kehena to a cotton because there is no das acheres makna. Obviously, there would be a difference between chamish esloim and trumas and meisles. Because chamish esloim, at the end of the day, till the father of the child gives it to the kohen, it is his personal money. It is defined as matnas kehena, but as his personal money. And he could choose any chamish esloim that he has, and it would be das acheres makna. But this discussion touches upon other matnas kahuna as well, which would be trumas. Could he give truma? And the Tzayis HaChoshen says, by matnas kahuna, there is no das acheres makna. And the Tzayis HaChoshen has another approach. How could you give matnas kahuna to a minor, to a cotton, if he doesn't have kinyan? And the Tzayis quotes Tosfos in Sanhedrin Daf Samaches. Tosfos deals with the question, how could a cotton have money? If he doesn't have kinyan, how could he have money? How could he have anything in his possession? And the Tosfos suggests two possibilities. One would be Yerusha, inheritance, because a person doesn't need to acquire, he doesn't need to do a kinyan in inheritance. That is a din Torah. So a cotton could inherit Yerusha just like a good. That's one. And the other one is, if he worked and you pay his wages, schar pu'ula yesh gam lekoton. Because schar pu'ula, you don't need a kinyan like in every other transaction. He deserves this money, and he earned this money by doing his job. And then the Tzayis HaChoshen says, the Torah says, Sachar hu lohem chelef avoidasam. So the Kohen and the Levi serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and the matnas kahuna and matnas levia are like the wages they're getting. They serve Klal Yisrael. They deserve to get paid, and it's like schar pu'ula. So Minchas Oshan, this week's parsha, there's a big discussion, and I argued, Chelef Avedaschem is only said to Leviim and not to Kohanim. Kohanim mishulchan gavoya kuzacho. Kohanim get directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, matnas kahuna. It is not schar pu'ula. So this is a huge discussion, but the fundamental question is, if it's das acheres makna, that only would apply if all we need by Pidyon HaBen is to give. But if the cotton needs to give something in return, that wouldn't work by a cotton. So obviously, all this discussion assumes like the Gra, like the Machna Ephraim, like the Pnei Yeshua, is like Priyas Choiv. It's like giving a gift or paying a loan. And the Kohen gives nothing in return. So many sources in Achronim seem to deal with this question. How do we define Pidyon HaBen? But I think most important sources do indicate this is a transaction. The father gives and the father gets. The Kohen receives money and the Kohen gives. What does he give? He gives the child. Was the child ever his? No. Will the child belong to his father? No. As I explained, a child does never belong to anyone in the monetary sense. Parents bear responsibility. But a child is not theirs to sell. A child is not theirs to give away. But nevertheless, the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos, Mitzvas say pay. If we have a Sefer HaMitzvos here, it would be wise to look, but I don't think many people are familiar with this form here. So the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos, Mitzvah pay, when the Rambam describes and defines the Mitzvah Pidyon HaBen, Ke'ilu Zocho Bo HaKohen. Yes, the child doesn't belong to the Kohen, but the nature of the mitzvah is Ke'ilu Zocho Bo HaKohen. It's make-believe. It's not make-believe. It is the essence of the mitzvah. And that is why the Torah uses the expression livdot. Kishepodim mashu, you pay and you acquire, like by Pidyon Hegdish. So I'm reading the Rambam. Shetzivono livdo is bechor odam shiyiten adomem l'koyen. V'hu amoroi, cho b'nechotin li ubelo nasun azois echtiye, v'hu shenevdenu men hakoyen, וכאילו הוא כבר זכה בו, ונקנהו ממנו בחומש סלוהם. והוא אמרו, אך פודוי תבדה עז בכל האדם. שנבדנו מן הכהן, כאילו הוא זכה בו, ונקנהו ממנו. It is as if we buy the child from the Kohen. Clearly, as if. But as if that is the definition of the mitzvah. That is the Agdor of the mitzvah. Hagos Mordechai. Yevamis Simen Kuf Chav Zayin. The Nusach that the father is supposed to recite and say, Beni ze bechor shalchohu. My child, my bechor, is yours, belongs to you. And that is what the father tells the Kohen before expressing his wish to, as if buy the child from the Kohen. And that is why the nusach of Pidyon HaBen is the Kohen turns to the father, and this nusach we find in the Ramosim in Shin Hey, all the halachos of Pidyon HaBen Yordei Shin Hey in Sif Yud. The Kohen asks the father, Ma boyes tfei. Decide. Do you want a child or do you want money? If you want your child, please give me 5 shkolim. So the Rambam, the Gos Maimonides clearly indicate there is something beyond just giving a gift. Lo kedivrei bir hagra, not like the Goim, not like the Machna Ephraim. There's actually a transaction going on. A transaction that has no effect halacha l'maaseh besides kiyum mitzvah. Nothing changes in the status of the child before Pidyon or after Pidyon. It is only the Seforno. And the Seforno is a beautiful sefer, but the Seforno is not a posek. And the Seforno, a few times in Chumash says that a child before Pidyon HaBen, oser b'hanoah. Oser b'hanoah. So a child, 30 days, can be very helpful at home. He won't wash the dishes, he won't mop the floor, can't do much. All the relationship between the mother and the child is one-sided, and the child is always at the receiving end. But if the Seforno says also by Noah, could you play with that child? could you cuddle him? If he's also bano. So this seforno is not halacha. And the seforno is not known as a posek. Maybe there is something in pnimius. But it is clear from the seforno that Pidyon HaBen, there is an effect. It's not just a gift like other matnas kohuna. Something happens. It is significant that the Torah calls this Pidyon. And the Rambam says, Ke'ilu zocho boy akoyen v'nikleu heimeno. And I think it's also clear in Shuvas HaRashba. Shuvas HaRashba chelek aleph semen yud ches. And this is maybe the most famous Shuvas HaRashba of all the thousands of Shuvas, because this Rashba is very widely quoted. And the Rashba is the most important source in the Rishonim. On which mitzvahs do we say a brocha, and which mitzvahs don't we say a brocha? We are all familiar with Berchas HaMatzah and Berchas HaMoror and Berchas HaLolav and Berchas HaSukkah. But so many mitzvahs we perform without a brocha. Kibbud Av V'Em doesn't have a brocha. We give tzedakah every day, we don't make a brocha. And the Rashba is the very first lesson to deal with the question, on which mitzvahs do we say a brocha, on which mitzvahs we don't? So the Rashba writes a big klal. Monetary mitzvahs, we never say a brocha. So you don't say a brocha on Priyas Choiv, you don't say a brocha on Matnas Kahuna or Matnas Levia. But then the Rashba asks, why do we say a brocha on Pidyon HaBen? And the Rashba says, you don't say a brocha on giving money to the kohen. You say a brocha on the Pidyon. And that is not only giving money. So the Rashba clearly says, Lo kedivrei haGra. And I wonder why the Gra doesn't quote this Rashba, and he doesn't see that the Rashba contradicts what he says. The Rashba says, if it would only be as all the other matnas kohen, just giving the kohen a gift, there wouldn't be a bracha. We don't say a bracha when we give trumas amaises lekohen velelevi. We don't say a bracha when we give tzedakah la'aniyim. So the Rashba says you say the bracha on the pidyon, not on the money that you're giving. So the Rashba once again clearly, like I proved from the Rambam, yes, there is some pidyon. The Rosh, at the very end of Masechet Bchoros brings, there were places, the minig was that the kohen said a bracha as well. That is not accepted halacha. The father says the bracha and the kohen does not. But there was a minig that the kohen said the bracha. And the Rosh rejects this minig, and the Rosh wonders, and the Rosh says, the kohen is not an active partner. Why would he say a bracha? He's just on the receiving end. The one that's Makayim the mitzvah is only the father. The kohen is not Makayim a mitzvah by receiving the money. So why would the kohen say a bracha? Rivash, Semakuf Lamed Aleph, and that is the very same Rivash we began the Shiur with. The Rivash that, according to the understanding of the Ramah, says there is no shlichus but Pidyon HaBen. But the Rivash says, yes, I think the kohen should say a bracha. And the Rosh wonders, but the kohen isn't doing anything. He's just getting money. The Rivash says, no. The kohen is as if giving the child. The father gives the money, and he is ke'ilu buying the child, and the kohen is the one giving the child to the father. So he should say a bracha as well. So this is one more source in which we see two different opinions. But I think it is clear from the Rivash that this is something beyond the giving a gift to the kohen. But maybe even the Rosh would agree there is something beyond giving money to the kohen, but still, in all practicality, the Rosh argues, but the kohen is just getting the money. And there is really no selling of an object because the child never belonged to him.
The father can choose who he gives it to. He can choose the client. So it's not about clients. His father is giving a gift. He can decide who he gives it to. So that, where does the client...
A husband decides which lady he wants to be Makadish, but still, it is a real transaction.
Yeah,
The fact that the husband decides whom he wants to be Makadish, but still it is a two-sided transaction. He gives and she gives. So yes, the father could decide which kohen, but that does not dictate that the kohen is just getting a gift. He chooses, as I explained before, the child doesn't really belong to the kohen. But the Rambam does write, it is as if the child belongs to Shevet Kohuna, let's put it that way. He doesn't belong to any specific kohen, but he does belong in a way to Shevet Kohuna. And any kohen the father chooses could represent Shevet Kohuna in activating this transaction. There's a machlokes in the Rishonim. So the mitzvah of Pidyon event is upon the father. But if the father didn't perform his mitzvah and the child became bar mitzvah, the child is mechuyev livdois es atzmoi. Is the father still mechuyev? And both of them bear responsibility, each of them. The father still has the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen, and the son, as he achieved godless and he became a bar chiyuva, shares the father's mitzvah? Or is the father just there as a substitute until his son grows up? Sefer HaChinuch clearly maintains, in Mr. Shin Tzadik Beis, that the chayiv that was upon the father will always be upon the father. And the fact that his son grew up doesn't pater the father. Both of them have the chiyuv. First one to do it is Zarech in the mitzvah, and the other one lost out. Rambam, Perek Yud Aleph Melechus Bekurim is clear in the Rambam, no. The father is just there as long as the son can do it on his own, because he's a child. But as the son becomes a gadol, and he takes this mitzvah upon himself, the father no longer has any mitzvah. And my feeling is that this question too depends on the two different approaches and definitions. What is Pidyon HaBen? If it is all about Priyas Chayiv, and the father owes a debt to Shevet Kohuna, why would that debt be annulled because his son grew up? If the mitzvah is actually Pidyon, then it is reasonable that the father had this chiyuv until the son grew up. But it is not reasonable that each of them needs to make this purchase or this transaction. But if it is shibud nechosim, why would the shibud be removed from the father's ownings and possessions to the sons? It is not necessarily the case, but it would be reasonable to argue then this question is also dependent on the above. And if so, the Rambam is l'shitosoi. Because I quoted the Lashon of the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos, Mitzvos Asei Pei, Ki ilu zocho boy hakoyen v'neknehu mimeno. And that's why the Rambam says, if the son took this mitzvah upon himself, the father is no longer mechuyev. So my fundamental opinion is, based on the Tshuvas HaRashbo and the Rambam, lo kedivrei Hagra b'Machne Ephraim. The Torah calls this Pidyon, and it is a different type of Pidyon. Not like Pidyon Hegdish. Pidyon Hegdish is a real kinyan. What was in the possession of Hegdish and it was Kodesh becomes Chol, and it changes hands. Pidyon Maser Sheni is, of course, a Kedusha, but Maser Sheni Mumin Balam in the first place. Pidyon HaBen has no halachic result or no halachic outcome or effect. It definitely is not a kinyan, and it is also not siluk kedusha, because contrary to what the Seforno writes, there is no kedusha on a child before Pidyon, and that kedusha goes nowhere after Pidyon. But nevertheless, we're dealing with the concept of Pidyon as if. but as if could be a real halachic definition. And as the Rambam clearly writes, Ki'ilu zocho boy akoyin v'nekneu emeno, and that is why the Rashba explains, there is no brocha on any other matnas kahuna. When you give a kohen zroya l'chayayim v'kevo, reishas egez, trumas meister and truma gedoyla, you'll give a levi masterish and there is no brocha. You give matnas laniyim, there is no brocha. You give tzedakah, there is no brocha. Pidyon HaBen is different because of the Pidyon. So, there are sources which the Shiur quotes that if a child, as long as you don't do Pidyon HaBen, the child's life is in jeopardy. And that's why it is important not to postpone this mitzvah. And this brings us to our next question, which is halacha lemaisa. And to our dismay, it happens. Because not every day is a happy day, and sometimes tragedy strikes, and it could strike anywhere. So what happens if a father passes away before his newborn son reached the 30-day mark? The mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen is upon the father. It is not upon the mother. What do we do with a yosef? Or what do we do with a father that is not interested in doing Pidyon HaBen? And more than once, I got a question. I remember years ago, a person called me. His brother had a baby boy, firstborn to his mother. But his brother is an atheist and he has no intention of doing Pidyon HaBen. And his father's brother, the brother of the father, is from, and he said, could I do it? You know, would I have a mitzvah? Could I do it? Because my brother wouldn't do it. Could someone else step in? So according to the Gra and the Machne Ephraim, yes, you don't need the father's consent. It's just matnas kahuna. You could do it. But according to all the other opinions, and definitely according to the Rivash and the Ramo, if shlichus doesn't apply, obviously you need shlichus. Because if you don't need shlichus at all, then the Ramo's psak doesn't make sense based on the Rivash. If you can't do it al yedei shaliach, it is obvious that the father must do it and no one else could. So this is a huge discussion going back almost 700 years. And the early sources are the Or Zarua and then the Maharil. So the Maharil says, what do you do with a yosem or a kid that his father did not perform the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen? And the Maharil says, the child will redeem himself when he becomes a gadol, and you should hang a necklace on his neck at Tasel Zov. And in that Tasel Zov hanging on his neck, it should be written, I am Chayiv B'Pidyon. I was not Podui. Because we're afraid in 13 years, who knows where life will take us, where life will take the child, and people won't be aware that this child was not nivda. So in order, it should be obvious, and the child should know that he needs to be kind of Pidyon HaBen when he grows up. He should wear this tas shel zav on his neck, which is not a very pleasant proposition in today's world. Having a child all through the years wearing this necklace, and his friends would ask him, what's this strange necklace you're wearing? Only girls wear necklaces, not boys. And he wanted to explain to everyone, my father is an atheist and he didn't do Pidyon HaBen, or I was a yosem and he passed away. This is a very unpleasant situation. So, but that is the psak of the early Rishonim, both the Or Zarua and the Maharil. And it is quoted by the Ramah, because the Ramah always follows the tradition of Gedolei Ashkenaz. The Or Zarua and the Maharil were Rishonim Ashkenaz. Siman Shin Hey, Sif Tezvav, the Ramah writes the story about a Tas Shel Zav. And there's a huge machlokes between the Taz and the Shach. What do we do in practicality? Because the Maral Meprag is cholek on the Maral, and he says Beis Din should perform the mitzvah. Beis Din should step in and they should do Pidyon HaBen if the father isn't around or the father doesn't comply. Or Avi Aviv. It is a Zayda, he comes before others, because B'nai Bonim Arein Kibonim. So the Zayda should have the first choice if he wants to perform the mitzvah. So this is a machlokes between the Maril and the Maral. Well, only one little yid separates the two of them. The Maril says, no, it is up to the child, and we wait till he becomes a gadol. And lest the chiyuv be forgotten, we should hang a sign up on his neck that I still need to perform the mitzvah Pidyon HaBen. And the Maral says, either the grandfather or the Beis Din or anyone else. And this depends maybe on the two interpretations. Is there Pidyon? And if there's Pidyon, maybe it is only the father that has the sole discretion and the right to buy his son. But if it's only a gift, then the Vilna Gaon says, anybody can do this. But even if somebody could do it, maybe it's preferable. Why don't you leave the mitzvah to the child? When he's going to grow up, he's going to come with tinus. Why did you take away my mitzvah? But if in any way, those achronim that say the child's life might be in jeopardy, then definitely would be zachan yodem shaloi b'fanav to do it when he's a child and not wait till he grows up. So the Turazov sides with the Maharil. However, the Tal is somewhat of a compromise, the Taz. And he says, if the father is alive, zachan la'odam shalo b'fanav. And we could do this mitzvah instead of the father, zachan la'odam shaloi b'fanav. If he wasn't makayim the mitzvah, we'll do it for him. But if the child is an orphan, a yosam, nobody has the mitzvah. Beis Din can do it. We need to wait till the child grows up. That's the opinion of the Taz. And the Shach, Siv Kotten Yud Aleph, and once again Siv Kotten Chaf, very briefly, the Shach says, no. And he sides with the Maral Prague. Beis Din should step in, grandfather or someone else. We don't leave a child without Pidyon. And the idea of hanging a necklace up on his neck is not a good idea, because that necklace will get lost 100 times till the boy grows up. And probably the boy will not feel comfortable wearing that necklace, and he probably won't wear it, and therefore that is not a good idea. And the Shach says, first priority to the grandfather or the Beis Din, or maybe another family member. So I told the brother of that father who had no intention of doing Pidyon HaBen, you do it, give Chamish Yisrael Mekoin. You can't make a brocha because Safek brocha is local, and this is a big discussion and a disagreement between the poskim. But do the Pidyon without the brocha, and do the Pidyon al Tanai. And when this child grows up, you will ask the child, we did Pidyon HaBen al Tanai. If you prefer to do the mitzvah, then Masa Bottle. And it's your right. But if the child will thank us that you cared for me when I was a little child, then the Pidyon, the original Pidyon, is chal. So that was the eights I gave to that person that turned to me, what should I do with my nasty brother that has no intention of being mekayim his mitzvah? So the way to perform this mitzvah, my family, we waited more than 20 years. And the first time we had a Pidyon HaBen in the family was my youngest daughter, first child, and that was just 8 years ago. We waited for many years. And since then, we had a few Pidyon HaBens in the family. So Baruch Hashem, if the mother is a Bas Kohen or a Bais Levi, we don't do Pidyon HaBen. If the father is a Kohen or a Levi, we don't do Pidyon HaBen. There are other circumstances in which we don't do a Pidyon HaBen. It's a big mitzvah and a big schus. So the Panav Zharov was a Kohen. And the Panav Zharov, as you could imagine, was a very sought after Kohen. And it was quite common that he was the officiating Kohen by a Pidyon HaBen, because so many families wanted the Panav Zharov as a Kohen. And the Panav Zharov had one Pidyon HaBen Torah that he said whenever he needed to speak at a Pidyon HaBen. So the Kohen asks the father, Ma boyest fei, what do you prefer? You want the kid, you want your son, or you want your money? And that is a strange question, as we quoted before in the Shiur. Because the child doesn't belong to the Kohen. And I don't think it ever happened in history that the father said, you know what? I like money. Keep the baby. What would happen then? I don't think the Kohen will say, why, are you crazy? I have my children. I have nothing to do with your baby. My wife will kick me out of the house if I come home with a new baby. He says, so what is the point in the Kohen asking the father, Ma boyes, the Panav Shalom had his word, and he said, you're a father, my dear friend, you're a father, and it's about time to start thinking seriously about life. What's important to you, your children or your money? What is more important to you? Ma boyes tvei. Do you want your children? Do you want to be mechanech your children? You should know to give your children a proper chinuch will cost a lot of money. So the Kohen asked the father, you're a father, my dear friend, and it's about time to start thinking seriously about life. Ma boyes tvei. What's more important to you? Is your money important to you or your children? And that is the rhetorical question in the way the Panav Shalom presented it in the question, Ma boyes tvei. What? Of course it's a nusach, and as I said, it's first in the Ramah and the Rishonim. That is what the Kohen says. But what the Panav Shalom's pshat is definitely not pshat. I assume that you won't understand. It's not really pshat, it's drash. But I think it's a powerful word. It's a powerful word. So the Kohen asked the father, you're a daddy now, so start thinking seriously about life. What's important to you? Are your children and the chinuch of your children more important to you or your money? So this week's Parsha is Parshas Korach, and we discuss one of the mitzvahs in this week's Parsha, which is a fascinating mitzvah, which is Pidyon HaBen. But every year in Parshas Korach, the sugya I discuss is what the story of Korach is all about. And in no other parsha in the Torah do we find such a striking episode about how terrible machlokes could be and how senseless machlokes could be. So the Chidush Harim said, Korach, dos Aviram argued, Madua tisnaso al kahal Hashem. Why are you so arrogant and you have so much gaiva? Just a week ago in Parshas Baloischa, the Torah testifies, V'hu ish Moshe onav ma'oid mekol adam asher al pnei adamo. You gotta be out of your mind to accuse Moshe and to say you're a bal gaiva. Say anything else, but don't be stupid and don't be ridiculous. Kodesh Baruch Hu is made Hu ish Moshe onav ma'oid makol odam asher al pnei adamo. Nobody was as humble as Moshe. And now Korach says, you're arrogant and you have so much gaiva maduas nesasu. You're out of your mind. Accuse Moshe, you're at a tzayach, you're magala royas, you're a shefach domi, you're a oived avodah zorah, anything, but don't say you're a bal gaiva when the Torah says he was the most humble person ever to live. So the Chidush Harim says, in a time of machlokes, anything goes. Anything goes. And you could say the most stupid things, the most ridiculous accusations, and people will buy it, and people will buy into it. And that's Begnus of machlokes. And how terrible is the result of machlokes? Rashi brings, Beis Din Shalmato judges people only above the age of 13. Beis Din Shalmato waits till 20. Ba'avoina machlokes afataf nispim. Children died. Children pay the price. And that is how terrible machlokes could be. And that is why Chazal say, Loi motzo HaKodesh Baruch Hu kli machzik brocha liyisrael elo hasholem. And the Rambam writes in the very last halacha in Hilchos Chanukah, HaTorah nitno lase sholem ba'olam drocheu darkenoim v'chones yivasei sholem. And the Rambam explains why Ner Beisoy is more important than Ner Chanukah, Mishum Shlom Bayis. And the Rambam speaks not only about Shlom Bayis in your own little family, but Shalom of the world. Lo nitna Torah elo lasei Shalom b'yolam. Because as terrible Machlokes is, how magnificent Shalom is, and how important peace and harmony is for the Jewish people. Likutei Torah of Reb Chaim Vital, quoting his great Rebbe, the Gaon, Reb Chaim Vital quotes a Medrash. And the Medrash says, B'shas Churban Habayis. Malach HaShoros asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rabbeinu Shalom, you are Mekayim the mitzvahs you gave Klal Yisrael. But you're not Mekayim your own mitzvahs. V'shofach es damai v'chisahe ba'afar, damam nishpach kemayim ve'ein kover. You gave a mitzvah of Kisi Adam, and you're not Makayim the Kisi Adam. You gave a mitzvah, V'yotzo akoyen es abayis, v'timo es abayis. First you empty the house, you take out all the vessels, and you were at Makayim. Bayis v'kol machmadeo olim be'esh. You gave a mitzvah, oisa v'yes b'noi lo teshchatu b'yom echad. Tzidkiyo and his children were murdered in the same day. So how come you were at Makayim the mitzvahs you gave us? And that is what Malach HaShoros asked. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded. What did he respond? The Medrash doesn't say. The Medrash doesn't say. So the Medrash asked these questions. The Malachim asked these questions. And the Riyah Kodesh gives the answer. Ki yepolam emchudavar ben dam ledam, ben din ledin, ben nega lenega. These refer to the three questions that the Malachim asked. Oisev Esmanon Shchato, Kisi Adam, Hatzoras HaKelim. What was the answer? Divrei Rivois B'Shorech. These mitzvahs are somewhat a manifestation of Midas HaRachamim. But B'Shas Machlokes, there is no Midas HaRachamim. B'Shas Machlokes, Midas Adin reigns supreme. And there is no Rachamim. And that's the answer to these terrible, heart-wrenching questions. Divrei Rivois B'Shorecho. So how important it is, L'Harbais Sholem V'Reis, and especially in a time of division, like the times we are living in, and there's so much strife and so much division and so much machlokes between different communities, and every individual needs to do in as much as he can do to bring shalom and achva and ahava and reis between people, between communities. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it seems impossible, but everyone needs to make an effort in his own daled amis of his influence to bring achva, ahava, v'shalom v'reis, and peace and harmony between Jews. Lo motzu HaKadosh Baruch Hu kli machzik brocha elo hashalom. And I once explained, Libi Yoimeli, what is the expression kli machzik brocha? Moshe lamaha davedoima. Today, when you go to a shop that sells drinks, all the drinks are bottled, and you buy bottles with drinks. In the days of Chazal, people used to bring their own vessels and their own kelim, and the mozeg used to pour from his barrels. Everybody brought from his home, his own bottles and his own vessels and his own kelim. Zebo b'kadoy v'zebo b'chavitoy. And you went to the mozeg, and he poured from his huge barrels into your own kelim. So a person brings his kelim to the shop, and he wants yayin hameshomar and shemen efarsaman. I got a big Yerusha, and I want the best and most expensive you have to sell. And I don't know whether you are aware, well, if you're insane and you have a lot of money, you could buy a bottle of wine for $1,000 and more than $1,000. And you could drink a cup of wine that is worth $500 if you're crazy enough and you have enough money. So this person comes to the shop and he says, I want the most expensive yain mishum b'shem afarsamin. And the shop owner looks into his vessels and he says, this kli is cracked. By the time you get home, it's going to be empty. For me, it's the best business I ever had. You're paying $1,000 to fill up this vessel. By the time you get home, you're going to be back here. But chaval, you know, it pains me because this kli is cracked. Go home and bring proper kelim. Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to give because the Kodesh Baruch Hu is a av rachum v'chanun. He wants to make us happy. He wants to give. And he pleads with us. Bring proper kelim. What are the kelim that could contain birchas shemayim me'al? Lo imotza Kodesh Baruch Hu yisol kli machzik brocha elo hasholem. If we don't have shalom, everything is going to go to waste. All the brachas from the heavens will go to waste. And that is the expression, Lo imotza Kodesh Baruch Hu yisol kli machzik brocha elo hasholem. Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to give, and Kodesh Baruch Hu has enough to give. All he's asking from us, bring proper kelim. Don't come to me with broken kelim. Everything is going to go to waste. So, Lo imotza Kodesh Baruch Hu yisol kli machzik brocha elo hasholem. And we should always be zoicha to what we say every day in the morning. Talmidei chachamim marbim sholem b'yolam. That is the duty of Talmidei chachamim, to bring harmony and peace and achva v'ava v'sholem v'reis to Beis Yisrael. V'yerosin sheyechal kenu v'moim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send us mevaser sholem, Yal Novi mevaser sholem she'yavoi v'yevaser sholem rabonav, and we should be zoicha b'kol b'yameinu to see Yeshua Seilomim and Bias Mashiach Tzedkeinu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.